welcome everyone to our original theatre talkback session with me, Terri Paddock, and I am very delighted to be here to chair this evening's session with Adrian Lukis, who is the star and co-writer of the one-man show, Being Mr Wickham. So, welcome all. Now, Being Mr Wickham is inspired by Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. It's already toured the UK. It had a run on board Cunard's Queen Mary 2 cruise liner, which I am extremely jealous about. During lockdown, it was streamed from Theatre Royal Bury St Edmunds, and that version is still available on demand until the 1st of May on the Original Theatre online website. But we're here because in addition to all of this exciting stuff that's happened with the play to date, later in May, it will transfer to New York. It runs from the 25th of May to the 11th of June as part of the acclaimed Brits Off Broadway season, along with Original Theatre's US premiere of Alan Bennett's The Habit of Art. So congrats, Adrian, on everything that I've just said, including, of course, your New York transfer, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the course of the next hour.
Thank you.
Normally, normally, I was saying to Adrian earlier, normally when I do these Q&As in person, I like to start actually by asking questions of the audience so that myself and my panelists can get to know you, our audience, a little bit better. And in this case, I'd ask some very straightforward questions like, who's already seen the play, and where did you see it? Did you see it online? Did you see it in a theater? Or were you one of the lucky buggers on the Queen Mary? I'd also, of course, ask who amongst you has read Pride and Prejudice, who considers himself a Jane Austen aficionado, or as I understand, they're called Austenites. Is that right, Adrian? Are they called Austenites?
Yeah, I think they are. That's right.
I bet but I'm going to assume we've got a healthy mix of all three of those in our audience tonight. And I'll also just assume that all of you, which would be my final question, are fans of the wonderful work of Original Theatre. We've got about an hour to talk, which I'm sure we're going to fill amply. It's always more interesting when you do ask questions. So, of course, online, you need to raise your hand. And I'm hoping that James from Original is going to show me, send me a message because I can't see where the questions are. Oh, I see where the questions are popping up now. There we go. Excellent. We've already had some in. So thank you for those of you already sending your answers in. I would just say when you do type them in, maybe if you could let me know what your answer to those questions are as a preface, like if you've seen the play already, if you're an Austenite, etc. But please bear with me, because I do want to get the ball rolling for about 15 minutes or so. So Adrian, we've got to be brief. And I want to start this conversation by really exploring with Adrian more your journey with Jane Austen and the character of George Wickham, which has culminated in this wonderful play. The play is set on the eve of George Wickham's 60th birthday and 30 years after the events in Pride and Prejudice. And coincidentally, if I've done my sums right, it was nearly 30 years ago, Adrian, that you started your own Being Mr Wickham journey, right? So you, of course, played the character in the very famous and well-loved 1995 BBC adaptation, along with some actors people might have heard of, like Colin Firth and Jennifer Ealy. So let's just get that out of the way to start with. I'm sure you've got fans watching who remember that and still consider that their favorite Pride and Prejudice. What's your enduring memory of filming that classic TV series?
Well, you know, funnily enough, of course, people, it's a question I get quite a lot. Because the series seems to have been blessed with getting the kind of reception that people only dream of getting, actually, for these kind of things. I think because it was such a success, everyone assumes it must have had a kind of special aura or allure when we actually filmed it. Of course, you know, most of the filming, not wishing to take away from that, but most filming is quite dull. I mean, it's you know, you're called very early and you sit around for a long time waiting to film your scenes. Having said that, I do think we all felt we were onto something quite good quite early on. They're an extremely nice cast. Colin and I knew each other from before. We'd been in a film of a William Boyd screenplay called Dutch Girls, which used to appear in video shops, almost in the sort of adult section, but is not an adult section film. It's just a film about a group of public school boys going abroad. Had Tim Spall in it, myself, Colin Firth, James Wilby, Bill Patterson. It was good. It was a good cast and a sort of a slight Mickey take, really, of I think of William Boyd's own school background at Gordonston. Jennifer, everyone was incredibly nice. In fact, I'd just spoken to Julia Sawala for the first time in years recently. Through emails. We were sort of emailing each other to do with this and getting her on board to do something which may or may not happen. But she wrote a sweet email saying how much she'd enjoyed it and how very sweet I'd been with her and kind.
And she played Lydia,
she played Lydia, sorry, she played Lydia, yes. And all I remember thinking at the time, which I've told her actually in the email, I said, I thought you found me very, 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 very dull because I was a bit older too. I remember telling her some very long joke about Dracula and Bram Stoker and the old Hammer House of horror films. And it went right over her head. And I remember thinking, oh no, that we were sitting in the coach one day. Colin, I mean, there's a story which I've told before, which I'll just very briefly allude to. Colin and I ended up in a jacuzzi together, stark naked in a jacuzzi, somewhere on location. And somebody came in and took a whole lot of photographs. I think it might have been Joanna David. And we were a little bit, we'd had a few glasses of wine by then. We'd been playing pool downstairs, and I knew him anyway. We were just having fun. Anyway, he did say the next morning, God, we've got to get hold of that camera, because this was, Wickham and Darcy naked in a jacuzzi together. And fortunately, I think Joanna wiped the film. It was a very, very nice experience. It was a very nice experience to shoot.
And of course, you were in your mid-30s by that point and already well established. You've mentioned films that you'd already done. You were doing seasons at the Royal Shakespeare Company. But would you say that had an impact on the trajectory of your career? And if so, how? And your life?
If the series had a trajectory for my
yes.
Yes, I suppose so. A lot of the stuff that propels you forward, you don't really know about. The paradox of being an actor is you can do work that is highly acclaimed and everyone goes, tells you how wonderful you are, and then you don't work for 2 years. I mean, it's very odd. Or you can have a sort of fallow period and then suddenly off you go and you get something fabulous. It's rather like I think it's probably rather like doing premium bonds, really. You just stick around and suddenly you get a little bit of something good comes along. I think it probably has helped my career. I'm sure it must have done. I certainly know it's been great fun with meeting people in the street, people coming up and invariably, even very young people, because they watch it with their parents, I suppose, or their grandparents, it would be now.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to have survived as one of those kind of timeless classics. I'm incredibly proud to have been involved with it. And I've grown, and the other part of your question was propelling not only my career, but in other aspects of my life. And one of them, I suppose, is writing this play, but also getting to know Austen and finding myself genuinely reading the books and laughing out loud at some of the stuff she writes, because it's so funny. And I think when I was at school, when I first studied it, I thought it was kind of very girly. I had to do it for A-level, I think, and I was much more interested in Arthur Miller and Strindberg. But I hadn't really realized how good she is, I was just being a sort of a bit of a silly young man, really.
Yeah, well, indeed. And as I said, that was the start of your Austen journey. And by the way, we definitely have Jane Austen fans in the audience, and a couple of them correcting me that the hardcore fans actually call themselves Janeites rather than Austenites. So thank you, Senia. But it did catapult you into this Austen universe, and I would say it seems to me that as far as literary fans go, there probably are not any more devoted literary fans than fans of Jane Austen. And in Bath, of course, you've got the Jane Austen Centre and a festival, which I know you've been involved with over the years.
Mhm.
But this has not been your first return to Jane Austen. So you also created an evening with Jane Austen. Tell us a little bit about that and how that came about, and again, how that kind of widened and expanded your knowledge and appreciation for Austen.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, there was a point when I was thinking, because I like to read, and I think possibly I dipped into another Austen book apart from Pride and Prejudice, and I thought there must be a good show here somewhere. There must be a good evening's entertainment of just having the readings. Well, one idea was to have the readings between the men and the women, the duologues, because I assumed, I mean, I hadn't then read all the books. I assumed there was always a central love story. I mean, I kind of knew there was really. And it was a question then of seeing if I could fillet those particular duologues out of the different books. So I started to do that, which meant obviously reading all of the novels to find the duologues. I decided to make it male and female rather than male and male. And having done that, decided, well, having now read the books and got the duologues, thought, well, I have to put it in some sort of context, because you can't just say, in the next novel, we see, you've got to have, in my opinion, you've got to have a little bit of something to sort of pad it out. When was the book written? When did it come in her progression as a writer? Has it changed at all from the very early novels? Has her writing developed? What was happening in her personal life? And so that led me to then start reading biographies. And a friend of mine who's a novelist said, well, you should get on and read Marilyn Butler, who was an academic of, I think, probably the 50s and the early 60s, on Jane Austen, which was fascinating. But it was very much putting her in a context, a sort of moral and political context, and where she stands compared to other writers in that period, in the Regency, and people beforehand, and whether she was a radical or whether she was a conservative, which people still fight about. And I won't dip into that now, because you'll get hundreds of people online saying that's nonsense. But that is the argument. I think we'll all agree. I mean, she's been claimed by all counts. So when I started reading the Marilyn Butler, and then I was reading the Claire Tomalin book and various other sources, and reading the letters and the novels, and then trying to construct a show, and eventually came up with this idea of an evening with Jane Austen. Then I thought it probably could profit from a little bit of music, so found this fabulous soprano called Rosie Lomas, who sings Regency period songs, and a little bit pre-Regency, so she's a little bit of Mozart. And so we've put that in. Then we needed an accompanist, so we got a harpist, and it began to grow. And that's a show we took around the UK for 3 or 4 years, kind of intermittently, probably only a couple of gigs a year, 2 or 3 gigs a year. And that really brought me sort of face to face with Austen in a much deeper way.
And I believe you performed that with Caroline Langrish, is that right?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Indeed. Okay, so there we're stepping on further along with Austen, and so now bring us up to date. So from that experience, from I read in another interview with you that over the years, being confronted by Austen fans and Pride and Prejudice fans, you found yourself many times having to defend the character of George Wickham, which I love the idea of that, that you have to speak up for a character that you played in the past. But how did all of these experiences then culminate in your idea to write this play, Being Mr Wickham?
Sorry, I've got this cold. I'm so sorry. Well,
that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, when I sort of got to around 60, I remember having a real old moan. And it's a funny thing, because everything your parents say, which is very boring when you're young, things like my knees hurt, my back hurts, I don't know why I forget things all the time. I don't know why I feel so tired and have to go and have a nap, or whatever it is, which and when you're young, quite rightly, you go, oh, and then you drift into that age where suddenly your knees aren't great, and it actually does happen, and it's of course it happens, and it's very irritating. So I was thinking I wanted to write for a long time, and I thought, well, Wickham's probably Regency is quite a good area to go into because I've read a lot about it now because of the Evening with Jane Austen shows. And then I was interested in exploring what it was like for to turn 60, and that led me on to thinking, well, how would someone like Wickham survive? This is a man who's all we know really about him is he's considered attractive. He has the best parts of manliness or something, I think they say. When Mr. Wickham walked into the room, all eyes were upon him. He was so far above all the others in charm and looks and all that kind of stuff. So you think, okay, well, this is a man who essentially is exposed for being less morally pure than we would have hoped. Because at the beginning, we think he's a really good guy. Even when he talks about Darcy and the betrayal, he does it in that sort of, well, you know, hey ho, he says, never mind, you know, come on, let's go through to supper. It's, you know, we don't want to, he's even got the sort of grace to say, it's fine. You know, I've been dispossessed of everything, but it's fine, you know, modest with it. And so he's exposed. And what I wanted to do was to look at someone like that and say what happened to Wickham, actually, essentially what happened to him, and how do these types of men survive? I mean, at what point does Wickham cease to be the attractive man who comes up to a young woman or a woman at the bar and says, hello, can I buy you a drink? You seem to be on your own. And at what point does that become the importunings of a seedy old barroom drunk trying to sort of catch himself a drink, and all the women go, yeah, really nice to meet you, thank you, actually we're going to take off now. And I imagine those kind of you know, those seedy old barroom bores don't really, I mean, I think they probably look in the mirror and think, I still look pretty good, you know. So that's part of what I thought would be an interesting sort of springboard into Wickham. And then I thought, well, of course, we all defend our own position in life. Or none of us believe, very rarely, I think, do people think, do you know, I'm a really bad person. I behaved very badly to everybody. I shouldn't have left my wife. I'm pretty mean, son of a gun. Most people, I think, believe they had due cause to do everything. You know, I had to leave. She was behaving like a nightmare. It was the only way, you know. And I thought, well, if that's the case, and it is the case, and someone like Wickham, who we know is used to protecting himself, possibly from the truth, if we believe Darcy, what does he say about himself? So when I decided to make it a Wickham's self-defense, in a sense, talking to the audience and saying, you've got me wrong. All of you have got me wrong. And part of it is going back, sorry, I'm now speaking too much. I'll get very much to the end of this. What I actually, of course, initially was to go back and reread Pride and Prejudice several times, particularly the sections where Darcy talks about Wickham, and see what was said, and then come up with my own form of defense. So it's often that the events are the same, but it's a different perspective. So lastly, when Darcy, for instance, says, Wickham was offered to become vicar at Kimpton Church. It was all arranged by my father. We're going to set him up with his good living. And then Wickham came, after my father's death, came to me and said, I don't think that's what I want to do. Could I have £3,000 instead? And I paid him off. And then he went to London. He says, I know not what happened to him. I heard some pretty terrible things. And then Wickham returns at some point later, a couple of years later, and says, I'm out of money. Actually, I would like to be the vicar at Kimpton. And Darcy says, well, no, you know, you took the money in lieu of that. Now, my version is very similar, but it's different. So I say, I wanted to be the vicar at Kimpton. Darcy's father had offered me this, and it was extremely generous of him to do so. I come down from Cambridge, which I've invented in the play. I had a fairly dissolute life, it's true, but I wanted to make amends. And then Darcy just point blank refused to honour his father's promise, just said, well, there's £3,000, go, don't want to see you again. And so I said I was cast out. And so that's the way that's what I've tended to do in the play. and I've had to
And
invent
it's
it.
very cleverly done. I mean, you do start to feel for Wickham. You can't, I mean, it's beautiful. Now, I am aware that our audience questions are building up, so I'm going
Yeah,
to
yeah.
turn now to some of those.
Okay.
And also, I forgot to say, but I will say this now, we are recording this meeting. So if anyone is sending in questions and they don't want their name said, then obviously do put that or submit them anonymously. But relating to what you just said, the first question I'm going to say from the audience, Adrian, is from Mia Greeny. Adrian, you are clearly a very lovely man. I agree. How did you channel the cad Wickham? How hard is that? And I suppose this is pertaining to what you're just saying, because there's a great line in the play, in your play, that you say, besides, am I to be cast as the villain in my own story? Are any of us ever the villain in our own story? Is that how you, if you were answering Mia's question, would that be
Yeah.
part of the
Well,
answer?
thanks, Mia. Well, I mean, I tell you what I did choose to do very early on. I don't know if I made that many bright decisions about playing Mr. Wickham, but I do remember one thing I decided was that for him to be plausible enough to convince Elizabeth that he's a good guy, he has to really win us over. And I very quickly decided not to play him with sort of veiled, seething looks and twirling moustaches and all that. He should, I think, I think he's described as amiable and gentle in the book, if I remember rightly. So I wanted somebody who was actually rather quiet, who just says, look, I've had this terrible time, and Mr. Darcy has behaved wretchedly, but there's nothing I can do about it. And no, never mind, let's go and have supper, and just be very rather gentle and winning. And I felt that was the right way of going, not actually being, hello, my name's George Wickham. I felt that would be wrong because Elizabeth would see through it. So I think if I am a nice person, yeah, thank you, then all I tried to do was channel niceness through through the character, because the story speaks for itself.
Now, in An Evening with Jane Austen, when you did the duologues, did you have an opportunity to play Darcy?
Yeah, I did. I did.
So which is more fun? Is it more fun being Darcy or Wickham?
Well, it amused. Well, and I played Mr. Bennet actually. I found playing Darcy quite hard actually. The scene I did from An Evening with Jane Austen was him proposing, and her turning him down, and him saying, I think it's the famous scene where he says, "Look, you're way beneath me socially, but I've fought against all my better judgment. I've decided I would like to marry you." Sebastian Faulks has an interesting take on Darcy. He thinks he's a psychopath. Yeah, she said he's a psychopath. Oh. He's completely, so he's written an essay on that. Remind me the original question, because I've wandered now.
Well, I was just saying, who was more fun to play, Darcy or Wickham? Wickham. I mean, this Being Mr. Wickham has had so many rave reviews, but there's one line that really stuck out to me in one of them, which was, I'd much rather spend an evening with Mr. Wickham than Mr. Darcy. And just and your play proves that it is more fun to spend an evening with Wickham. And as you say, I think one of the lines in the play is, there is no story without the rogue. So
yeah. And I always do say, somewhat facetiously, because I know people are slightly aghast at Mr. Wickham's behaviour, and understandably so. But I do always maintain that you'd have a really good night out with Wickham. I mean, you really would have fun. You go to the best bars, you'd have the best drinks, you'd have a lovely meal, incredibly entertained. And at the end of the evening, the only thing about Wickham was he'd suddenly reach for his jacket and he'd say, oh God, I've left my wallet, behind. I'm so sorry. And I would go, never mind, it's been great fun. And I think that's probably how he skates through life.
Very good. Okay, Stephen Gilchrist, Adrian, would like to ask and good question, Stephen. Stephen is asking, what do you consider the greatest challenge in doing a one-person show? And I believe Being Mr Wickham is in fact your first one-person show. So have you found it challenging,
Yes.
and how?
It is my first and probably only one-man show. Well, it's very nice that you get to play a really big part, which all actors want to do. So you get to play the lead. The problem is when you're on stage, there is no one to help you out. When we did the live stream, which is the one that's up online at the moment, that was quite frightening because we'd only rehearsed the play for a week, I think. I've been writing pretty much up to the last minute. And it was quite frightening. Because there's no give and take. It's not normally in a play. Someone says, you know, I don't love you anymore. Then the other person says, well, you should do because I've been here for you. You know, well, I don't. And I'm now leaving. And no, you mustn't leave me. It's much easier to sort of play ping pong, you know. But in this case, I'm having to remember, oh God, this is where I leap from this subject to this subject. And then this is where I go to the window and see the girl outside. And this is where I come back and talk about school days. And so all of that's quite tricky, Stephen. That is the challenge. Having said that, when it's going well, and if I feel calm and confident, and I do now, I enjoy it. I mean, I come on and I think, yeah, it's Mr. Wickham. He's here and he says hello. You know, he's very warm with the audience. And once or twice, it's felt almost like a stand-up. I think at Darlington, I had people yelling out from the audience, you know, oh, go and get yourself another drink, Mr. Wickham, you know, and you know, oh, Mr. Wickham looking a bit unsteady on his feet, or what, you know. I was thinking, I don't know quite how much to respond to this, because yes, I do talk to the audience, but I'm not singling people out really, because then it does become like a stand-up. But no, it's been great fun. I've really enjoyed the whole process.
Very good. And you talked a little bit about that there. So did you find it very different performing in front of a live audience? And do you have a preference between the live audience and the hybrid streaming that you did at Theatre Royal?
I prefer live. There's something about looking into people's eyes, and you know, the play, for those who haven't seen it, I mean, it's let me tell you about, okay, this is what happened. I was in London, I was in Covent Garden, and then this woman arrived, you know, and he tells these stories because he's reliving, as an old man, he's reliving the moments in his life that mean something to him. Exciting moments, meeting women, or gambling, or, you know, tragedies, the things that have meant something to him. And now I've lost the thread again. Remind me what you
That's
were.
okay. You enjoyed it. And that, by the way, was a question from Eleanor Mary Cadell. Which did you enjoy more, performing in front of a live audience or the live stream? But that's very good. Well,
live theatre.
Another questioner is saying along those lines, can you just say a little bit more about your experience in original theatre's very interesting pandemic mesh of television and theatre? It has been incredibly pioneering what original has done. Did you feel that way taking part in it, and was that attractive to you to be part of that?
Yeah, it was
pushing the boundary with theatre.
They're a great company, and I'm not just saying that because they're my employer at the moment. And they pounced very fast on the play. So when I got the play to Alistair Watley, he just went within a few days said we want to do it.
And that's the artistic director of original theatre.
We immediately got back and said, I think it's great, and I want to do it, but I want to do it very soon. I want to do it before lockdown ends, because I want to live stream it from a theatre. So we live streamed it from Barry, which was actually it was the rocket I kind of needed, because it made the writing had to be done ferociously fast then. I mean, I spent hours, you know, just trying to cobble together stories, and phoning up Catherine Curzon, who was a part of it as well, of course, and just saying, what do you think of this? And she'd like, yeah, I think that's great. And going away and belting my way through it. And then eventually we had to call a halt to the rehearsal, to writing, because I had to learn it, because I kept changing the stories and putting in new stories. And eventually I just had to say, right, stop writing and learn, because you've got to do this live in 10 days or something, 2 weeks. But no, Original are doing fantastic work, and they've got so many productions up and running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose also, Adrian, as a co-writer, you do have some latitude if you do decide you want to continue to work on the script. Has it changed from the version that we've seen that is still available on demand to what we might see if we see it in New York? Has it changed at all?
No, I don't think it's changed a huge amount since the live stream. I think it will have changed a bit. I'm always cutting. Actually, I'm always filleting. I'm always sort of saying to the director Guy, I think they've got the point by now. I don't think I need to put this line in as well. I'm always trying to cut back. I think it'll be pretty similar. There was a story I was really keen to put in, because I've had to read a lot around the Regency period, because of course this is Wickham in 1845, really, looking back over his life. So it was into Victoriana. And I've had to try and sort of put it in a context. But there was a story which was set in Almac's dancing rooms, where they were it's a club, really a private club, and Almac's was run by 5 Gorgons called the Lady Patronesses, or 7 of them, I think, who either allowed you in or didn't. And they wouldn't allow you in just because of your aristocratic birth. If they took against you, you just wouldn't let you in. And you couldn't get into Almack's, nothing. And I had a story which I thought was really good, actually, because I wanted to get this idea in about this club and the sort of structure and the class structure of Regency society. And Wickham isn't an aristocrat, of course. He wants to get into this club, and he can't get in. So he dresses up one day as a woman and calls himself the Countess de Leven, I think, and manages to get himself into the club because he's been bet by a group of swells, aristocrats, the dandy set, Al Vanley and Henry Giroux, all these true characters, who meet him on Piccadilly one day and say, you've got such low birth. Your father was a steward and your mother ran off somewhere and left you. How dare you show yourself around us, Wickham? And they say it's a shame we never see you. And Wickham says, and he's with Denny, who I pick up this idea that Wickham is friends with Denny, as we know from Pride and Prejudice. So they're roaming London together. And Denny says, you're mistaken, gentlemen. Mr. Wickham is always invited to the best possible clubs and parties. In fact, we will be at Almack's this coming Friday night. And Deroe roars with laughter and says, right, £10,000 wager. Says, I will not be seeing you at Almack's because you can't get in. And Wickham says, and Wickham then, they stroll off laughing. And Wickham turns to Denny and says, what on earth have you done? £10,000. I mean, I can't get into Almack's. And then they devised this ruse to get him in. But that was really good fun. But it took too long, and in the end, we just decided the story had to be cut. So, in other words, it'll be substantially the same.
Despite the period setting, that just as you're describing that, I am remembering the play and the feeling that comes across so strongly of the class, the difference in class, and the wealth inequality and the haves versus the have-nots, and then how that plays out between Wickham and Darcy, and that exploration of that relationship, that central relationship, and really the enmity between the men. It's fascinating. So for anyone who hasn't seen it and loves Pride and Prejudice, they must to delve more into that relationship. Okay, a few more questions. Let's see. This is also tech related. Judy Hogarth from Dorset says she loves your performance, but her question is, do you think that Zoom, online theatre, has changed live theatre. She says that, quite honestly, it was marvelous during the pandemic, and I wonder why theatres haven't done more on Zoom sooner. It's a great way for the theatres to earn, and for me, because I live in Dorset and I don't have to travel, I'm a senior citizen. Do you see, even now post-pandemic, that you might do more projects like this? And do you think that's
I
a
don't
good thing?
know. I don't know. I mean, I've watched a few things on Zoom, the NT Live and that kind of stuff, and I must say it's extraordinary. However, I suppose, and I do think it's a great lifeline, particularly, as you say, if you're living in Dorset, or you know, it's difficult to get into London. It's also incredibly expensive now to go to the theatre, with a train fare and supper and everything else. It runs into hundreds of quid. No, I think it's a wonderful thing. The only thing I would possibly say, to speak very obviously, is to say, well, of course, it's not technically live in a way because you're not there. And if that matters to you, and there is something, I think, to be gained from being there and watching the sweat fall off the actors' faces and all that, you know, it is a live event. And I think, and the only other thing I'd say from an acting's point of view is, occasionally, if you're used to playing a big space like the National or something, and you're used to playing the back of the house, as we say, being seen at the back of the house, you can't do a tiny little film or television performance, because it won't read. People won't be able to literally see what you're doing if you're doing a performance as you would for television for a close-up. So you have to project to make it bigger, and it's a slightly odd thing when you're both having to, because you are actually filming a live theatre performance where you are trying to reach the back of the house, and at the same time that can look very big on camera. And then do you start to reduce your performance down, because essentially you're playing to the camera and to the close-up, in which case you're not really serving the live audience. That's all I would say about that.
Beyond this hybrid that you've done for original, for Being Mr Wickham, do you have a preference between doing film, screen, and stage? Because you've done so much of both throughout your career. Which do you prefer?
Well, I think I probably prefer the theatre. But there's a kind of a great thing if you're really into a TV part, and it's a good part and it's well written, because they're often not very well written television parts. But if it is well written and you kind of understand the character, it's a great luxury in a way to know that the camera is going to be as close as this is now. You know, I mean, you've just got to be absolutely truthful, and the audience and the camera will see whether that's true or not, whether you are being or not. And it can be very rewarding. I think I used to find, when I was younger, I used to find acting on film quite frightening. And I think it is quite frightening a lot of the time, actually. There's an awful lot of pressure on you. And, you know, and actors impose pressure on themselves as well. You know, God, I've got to be really good in this. I've got to be really good. You know? And you've worked really hard in the past, and they come in and say, right, we're doing close up on Adrian, you know, and in comes all the pressure and the makeup people, and the lights are being adjusted, and there's silence on set. Okay, you know, turn over, and you know, it's trying to remain relaxed and calm in that. And whereas theatre, weirdly, it's like being propelled out of a cannon. I mean, you're just thrown on stage, and you just go, and you just have to survive. And you've got 2.5 hours, and you just try and do the best you can. Sometimes the momentum just takes you through.
Great. We have a great question from Nick Humby relating to this. And also, I should say, with the on-demand version, you did, it includes a Q&A after the performance with Libby Purvis. Now, at that point, you had not, because you were streaming, obviously, you had not seen the filmed product. Did you ever get round to watching yourself?
I think I did. I think I did, because I think I felt I ought to. I mean, I don't want to sound overly modest about this or overly sensitive, the sensitive actor, but I don't watch myself hardly ever on television. And I think I did see it because I think I felt I had to, really, because I have a lot of skin in the game on this, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I better see if I'm any good. And or it's not really that. It's sort of, oh, is there something that needs to be cut, or did that bit not really work, or could that be done better? So I think sometimes you've got to put your personal feelings aside and be a little bit more objective and say, stop being so self-aware and just watch it practically, you know.
Indeed. So Nick asked, bearing all that in mind, did you worry about your live performance being captured for eternity on video? I mean, because the essence, as we've said, as you said so beautifully, of theatre is that it is ephemeral, it is different every night. Did you worry about that one performance being captured forever? Or was what we now see on demand edited to remove things you don't like?
No, no, I didn't mind, because you know, every time one goes on television and is filmed doing something, it's out of your control anyway. The editor's doing it, and it may well be that you see a bit of it and think, oh God, I'm awful in this, you know, or I look awful or something. Well, that's the way you were at that particular point in time. You did the best work you could, and that's the way you looked, and there you go. So, you know, suck it up, sort of thing. And I think in terms of this, yeah, you sort of go, well, I'm perfectly proud of the work we did. I think a week was long enough to get a good sense of it. It was a bit frightening because it was live and it was going around the world. My daughter actually watched it in New Zealand at 4 a.m. or something. So it was quite
That's a good daughter.
That's a good daughter. So it was quite it was quite frightening. But no, I stand by it, and I think it's perfectly fine that that's what it was. The only thing I would say is, like any theatre run that I've ever been involved in, the performances tend to get better as the run goes on. And actually, weirdly, the worst night to go to a theatre, I always think, is the press night. And probably the next night as well, because press night, people are really quite terrified. And then everyone goes out and gets absolutely slaughtered afterwards to relax and wake up with terrible hangovers and then go in and not very good the second day. So I would say avoid both those performances. And go and see it a week later.
I'm always amazed by shows that schedule a matinee the day after the press performance. Like that's a producer with a cruel streak, I think.
That's absolutely totally sadistic. No, I mean, people inevitably, I mean, even if you don't go out and celebrate, it's a late night. Your agent's there, your family are probably there, your friends are there. You know, you go out for a meal. It's always a late night, and it's nerve-wracking. You know, it's very tiring building up to a press night.
So there are a couple questions here that may be better answered by Original, but I'll shout them out and see if you know or someone from Original listening knows. So first of all, would you like or will Being Mr Wickham ever be released on DVD? That's the first one. And the second one is, Adrian, any opportunity you can bring this play to more theatres in the north of England? I would like to see it at the Royal Exchange in Manchester. It would be a wonderfully commanding yet intimate space to explore the character.
Well, I would love to too. The problem is, I've produced. I'm not producing this particular one, but I have produced An Evening with Jane Austen, the play prior to this that I was talking about earlier. It's very hard work, and it's very difficult to persuade people to come on board to produce. You know, you send in your proposal, you send in films, you know, reviews, and a month later someone gets back to you and says, yeah, maybe, I'm not sure, we'll have to put it before the board. And then they say, well, I hope we're not expecting, you know, we haven't got very much money, and all of that stuff starts kicking in, and suddenly, you know, it's 18 months down the line. I would love to take it up north. I would love to give it a better run around the country as a tour.
Did you go to Bath on tour? Did you go to Bath? Did you go to Bath when you toured
it before? No, we
didn't
go to Bath, although I've actually produced a very, very early incarnation of Being Mr Wickham in Bath by just getting in touch with the theatre and sort of persuading them to put it on, basically. But in those days, it was very different. And in fact, I was reading it. I mean, I was sort of referring to it, and then decided very quickly it was something needed to be learned. So it now runs at about an hour, and essentially, just so for those who don't know, it really puts Wickham's life into some sort of context where I hope we understand him by the end and think not only has he been, I hope, a charming sort of host of the evening, but also he explains, whether or not you believe him, of course, is entirely up to you, but he explains from his point of view why he has behaved the way he has behaved. And it's partly because he's never had any money. Darcy's had all the money, and Darcy was a poisonous little boy who was so jealous of the young Wickham, who was blessed with charm and was everyone loved, that he just sets out to sort of destroy Wickham. And that's Wickham's version of events. But also it takes him, of course, to Waterloo with Denny, to his years in London, Cambridge, horrific school days, which I sort of culled from reading about Regency school days, about Jane Austen's period, actually, children dying at school and being abandoned by their parents and dying of cold and lack of food. And I thought that would be interesting. So the play is a sort of look at Regency England, and is a sort of an apology for Wickham's apology for himself, and to some extent it says to the audience, please understand, you know, this is the way you think the story should be told, but this is actually the truth. And hopefully by the end of the evening he's put up a fairly plausible case.
Yeah. Other people are saying, Sheila Kidney saying, please don't forget to come to Scotland when you tour again. So you've got lots of invitations there. The same applies. Yeah. What you were just speaking of, another aspect of Being Mr Wickham that I loved, and I know the Austen fans love, is that you find out in your version of Wickham's future what happens to many of the other characters in Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, yes.
But also you put in the play, you know, what comes across is your deep research into the period, as you mentioned, and I was fascinating to hear more about the courtesan Harriet Wilson, and also Byron as a figure in that day. So there's so many interesting aspects to the piece in that way. Yes. Okay, we are gonna charge through quickly to a few more questions. Let's see, Adrian. So Anonymous wants to know if you had to recast the play, that you weren't going, why spoil perfection, because obviously you are the perfect part, but if you had to recast, who else from today's acting talent pool would you cast as Wickham?
Oh goodness me, you know, I've never given that any thought at all.
But could you see somebody else doing it? It could have a performance life beyond you.
Yeah, no, of course. I think a number of actors could do it perfectly well. I mean, really, I think without being falsely sort of, I think Wickham, I think he just has to come across as a man you would think, oh God, poor guy. I really believe what he said. And I think the danger with him is coming in, as I said earlier, and playing him in any way on the make or oily, or overly charming. I think people, particularly women as bright as Elizabeth Bennet, their antennae would be up immediately going, I don't trust this guy. There's something about this guy's not right. So essentially you just need an actor who can play it very, very straight and be believable, I think. I would quite like to have another crack at him myself. Well, I sort of am with the play, I suppose. I mean, inevitably, you know, it's why actors play Hamlet 3 times, because they think, oh, now I know how to play him 10 years later. I think that happens a lot with actors. But I'm sorry, I'll have to have a think about who might.
Okay, we'll have a think. Well, here's another casting question. Emily Gold is asking if you could play another Austen character, regardless of whether it's, you know, age appropriate, or I would say gender appropriate, who would it be and why?
Well, I suppose Mrs. Bennet's quite fun, isn't she? There's well, actually, this isn't quite answering the question. There's a terrible old bore in is it Mansfield Park, where I think it says at the beginning, his greatest pleasure was looking through Burke's Peerage to see his own name written down. It was his greatest pleasure in his life, and I thought that's just such a brilliant look at summary of someone's character. I will at some point, Mr. Bennet, I suppose. I knew Ben Whitrow very well, who when we did an evening with Jane Austen, Ben used to come and perform the Mr. and Mrs. Bennet scene. We used to have, we used to put it in the play, and I persuaded Ben to come along in his 80s, and he'd say, "Oh no, I don't. Nobody wants to see me. Nobody wants to see me. I'm far too old." I'd say, "No, you're not too old, and they'd love to see you." And usually at the last minute, I'd say, "Well, if you're here by midday, we can leave together." And he'd usually get it about 30 seconds before midday. He'd appear in a taxi and say, "All right, I'll do it," which is great. So we went to the Royal Pavilion in Brighton, and it was lovely. And I said, "Well, normally we would now go into the Mr. and Mrs. Bennet scene, but actually we're very lucky. We've actually got the original and priceless, the real Mr. Bennet here. And Ben would like to come and join us." And he would get up and, of course, rise to the occasion brilliantly. So I wouldn't mind having a crack at him at some point. That would be quite fun.
I have an idea, because Being Mr. Wickham, I mean, the running time is only about an hour, so you could write a one-man play about Mr. Bennet, and then you could present them in a double bill, and you could sister in Scotland and Bath.
Can you imagine the audience like, "Get off, please, get off the stage"? I think
that would be perfect. Be perfect. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. And there was another question here. What do you think Jane Austen would make of the interpretation? I would just say, I think you were asked that by Libby Purvis. So someone can answer, you can get the answer to that on the stream that's available, unless you want to very quickly say anything further on that.
No, I think she'd be, I think she'd feel it was faithful to her character, I hope.
Very good. Okay, so let's just get excited for a moment about New York, Adrian. Have you performed in New York before?
I never have. No, I've never been to New York, and I'm I must say I'm really thrilled. I mean, it is a very exciting thing to be involved in something like this that's written and by yourself and rehearsed and it's great. It's very, very exciting. I'm hugely looking forward to it. I've been to New York once before. I did a play called The Price.
You've only been there once. You've only been there once.
Yes, I have. I did a play called The Price for Arthur Miller Play in the West End with David Suchet and Brendan Coyle and Sarah Stewart. And we came in from Chichester and from Bath and went into the Wyndham Theatre in London, and I thought, well, I better make sure my American accent is up to snuff. It's set in the early 60s, so I went to New York for 3 weeks to sort of listen to Americans in dialect coach and stuff, and it was fun. It was very cold. It was early January, and I must say the cold was intense. But to go back now is wonderful. Yeah, it's. I mean, I just love traveling, really, and if I can travel around the world doing Mr. Wickham, I will be very happy. I will be a very happy boy.
And I imagine that there are plenty of Janeites in the States as well. What do you think? I mean, as a writer now, I think it must be kind of exciting as well that you're going over with an Alan Bennett play, that you are in rep with Alan Bennett. How does that feel?
Well, I haven't seen it, of course. So one thing I have to remedy immediately is to see Original Theatre's back catalogue. So I look forward to watching it. And Stephen Boxer actually is a mate of mine. So there's a double reason.
That'd be fun. Very good. Okay, and then your journey with George Wickham does not end here, does it? Well, hopefully you'll have much further life for the play. But what else are you doing with George? Tell us, where does George's story go now with you?
Well, when I was when we were doing the tour around the UK, we had a few days down at Guildford, and I thought this was a good opportunity. And I met a literary agent at a party. A friend of mine is a novelist, and it was the book launch of his book launch. And this guy, Charlie Campbell, was there, and I just got chatting to Charlie about cricket, actually, originally, I think. And then I said, well, look, I've got this play, and explained what it was about, and I think it might make quite a good novel. And I said, would you be prepared to come and see it? And he said, yeah, I will. And he did. And he said afterwards, I think it's great. and I'd like to take you on and represent you, and I think you should write the novel. And I feel slightly fraudulent because I've not written a novel before, and I rather boldly kind of said, yes, I'm sure I can do it. Since when I've been doing a lot of research, excuse me. I'm so sorry about this, very embarrassing. But I've done a lot of research, reading endless books about the Regency and histories of the Regency and novels set in the Regency and commentaries on the Regency. And I do know there's a point, and I think what I'm doing is what writers always say you shouldn't do, is constantly procrastinating the day. I am making lots of notes. I am collating lots of things, and I do have the beginnings of a sort of spine of writing. And I think really now it's the point to actually sit down and just write. But so that is very exciting. And of course, in terms of the play is like, now it's an hour long, but actually it's only the bare bones. If I take this on and now write a novel or develop it further than I have done, it will mean fleshing out what I've already got and going in to even more territory. And it's really fun. It's daunting, but but the play was incredibly daunting to begin with, and it got written. So I'm sure the novel will get written as well.
And you could have been a writer, if your acting career hadn't taken off so fantastically. I mean, you wanted to write originally, didn't you? You wrote at university, and so this is your career, your second career.
Yeah, I wrote
promising.
at school. Yes, I wrote a play at school and thought I'd be a writer, and then went to university, and I was surrounded by really good writers actually at university, and I found I could do the acting more easily too. And I thought, well, I'll write another day. And then the years slipped by. I always have written. I've always sort of, tinkered away. But the reason I actually wrote, finding, Mr Wickham got written was, Catherine and I together thinking it through, and then just having to write because there was a deadline. I mean, I had to do it because there was a live stream performance coming up in 5 weeks, so it had to be written.
Given how well you now know the Regency period, would you like to time travel back and live there for a bit? What would be fun about that?
Well, in some ways, I think it would be very, very interesting. I mean, it was quite a barbarous period in some ways. I remember, I think the lady who taught us, Jane, who taught us dance when we were doing Pride and Prejudice, when we were filming it. I remember she made a very good comment. She said, I don't want any of this restoration twirly stuff, bowing to the ladies and stuff, and all being rather sort of, ooh. She said what they call the reverence, which is when the man, comes down to look at the lady to have the dance, and she meets him and says, yes, we can dance. These were very fit people. I mean, they'd survived childhoods of disease and everything else. These were the strong ones. The men rode on, their horses for miles. I mean, they were very tough specimens, and I think that's quite an interesting thing. They were strong people. I think the amount of drinking. I mean, we think England's got a problem with its drinking, and it probably does. But back then, I mean, they used to talk about 5 bottle a day men. Who drink 5 bottles of port a day. Gout. Obviously terrible poverty, enormous wealth. The dandy set are particularly interesting. The Beau Brummel, which I'm just about to read a book about, but Beau Brummel actually, by Ian Kelly. So I want to know more about Brummel and his influence. But of course, if you were in the right circles, you were fine. Yes, and also the thing people tend to forget, of course, is it was in a very, very politically, it was a very up and down period. It was enormous, the threat from Napoleon. I mean, we know it was there, but of course Austen doesn't really talk about it. Napoleon's imminent invasion of Great Britain, Nelson, 1805, I think it was Trafalgar, and then we have Waterloo in 1815, saving Christendom from the great Satan of Napoleon. And this was sort of overshadowing everything, and new very, very radical left-wing ideas, which were being bandied around on the continent, and everyone living in terror of that. particularly repressive time in terms of the press being held down and ideas and people being chucked into prison, because these were dangerous ideas. So, you know, very colourful. No, I'd love to have been around. So
Yeah, lots of source material for
oh,
inspiration.
exactly.
So we keep getting more and more people asking you to bring the play to all corners of the globe. Like for now,
Thank you. I wish
Los
we
Angeles,
could.
South Africa, you're on demand everywhere. But I just want to remind everyone that Being Mr. Wickham is still available to watch online. You can get a special ticket that includes oh, I forgot to use my prop, a special ticket that includes the program, which looks like this, and has a wonderful piece written by your good self as well. And that is available online on demand until the 1st of May. For everyone who is stateside, please do go and see Being Mr. Wickham, which is running 25th of May to the 11th of June in New York at 59 E59. And make sure that Adrian has a really good time in New York, but give him back because we want him to come back. Just finally, Adrian, can you give me, like, for those who for some reason are watching but haven't yet seen the play in one of these forms, give us your 30-second pitch. Why should people see again Being Mr. Wickham?
Well, I think if you're just interested in the book, and if you like the story of Pride and Prejudice, which is one of the most wonderful stories, and you want to see something that delves into a different area of that story, and it's using Pride and Prejudice as its source material. It's looking at one of the great rogues of English literature, really, the play. And it is, I think, very fairly and very humanely allowing him to present himself to the world with the full knowledge of how you all look at him and all you all think of him, and to say, hang on a second. And the stories, I hope, as my 30 seconds come to an end, I hope at the end of the time, the end of the hour, even if you don't believe him, you will have been entertained by him as he wanders around drinking around this little study, talking to the audience about his life and all the different aspects of Regency England and the barbaric days and the triumphs. So that's why I would say, come.
And do you mind if I quote your play back at you? Because
No.
you will also get some true wisdom and ways to live your life. I love one of the final lines in the play, which kind of seems to be Wickham's 3 rules for life. Lie if you have to, know your escape routes, and never pay the bill. That's just wonderful. Just wonderful. So please, everyone, please go see Being Mr. Wickham and spread the word about this great show and original theatre. Adrian Lukis, thank you so much for your time, and everyone, thank you for watching.
Thank you, Terri. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.